If you're old enough to remember, the 1990s and the 2000s were full of Christian media in books, comics, movies, and video games that espoused very American interpretations of the faith. The Left Behind book series on one hand and VeggieTales on the other. It's become quite nostalgic for some, and occasionally you'll find a game that incorporated Christian aesthetics and apocalyptic themes in a way like 1999's Requiem Avenging Angel by Cyclone Studios, a subsidiary of 3DO. It's another obscure FPS that in several ways was ahead of the curve. A story-driven campaign of interconnected maps like Half-Life and Unreal, gory fast-paced combat like Quake, and a mix of traditional FPS weapons and powers like Bioshock and Undying. This originality is what attracted me years ago and has been kept largely preserved through Ziggurat's republishing efforts. Then I quickly realised why it's not another fondly remembered shooter. Requiem has a lot of deeply outdated and compromised mechanics that keep it from being really good, coming up quite short. Despite appearances, the current Steam and GOG releases are a bit broken, albeit vastly better than trying to run off a disc. N-Glide can make the game run at higher resolutions. The menus are still capped at their native sizes, and a lack of widescreen support or FOV options aren't ideal. There's also no music unless you run Requiem via the Direct3D EXE, but now the game crashes occasionally. I guess you can play the soundtrack in the background or something. At least the key bindings are easy to change. The story is a sci-fi biblical one, as you play the angel Malachi, journeying to Earth which has been conquered by rebellious angels, led by Lilith, who are trying to break the barriers of heaven, earth, and chaos and initiate Armageddon. Most of the game takes place around the city of New Damascus, wherein you aid the resistance and track down the fallen angels. There are some novel ideas on show, in-game and scripted cutscenes, dialogue of different NPCs, a street hub, and a rebel base you return to. It's very precedent for the later Half-Life 2, complete with armoured patrols in the streets, harassing and arresting civilians, that soon blows out into a full war zone of street fighting. Basic character models, simple cutscenes, and linear progression all set in the one city doesn't do wonders for a story that lacks enough characters and time to develop meaningfully. Since it features Lilith, it's just a matter of time before, yep, Lucifer showing up. The setting feels very underused. I would have liked the Chaos Realm being more present outside the intro and a few boss fights, bleeding into the urban decay and corrupting the world more. The game design is more impressive, as the maps aren't singular arenas you fire through, but each are logically connected between the simple objectives. These can be activating a computer, planting a bomb, rescuing prisoners, or stealing advanced weapons. It's not as seamless as Half-Life. You'll notice a strange jump cut as the map loads in. The levels try to follow a realistic layout of apartments, offices, military bases, and industrial sites. You'll see signs point to armories and dormitories, which aren't bad, it just results in ubiquitous corridors and a lack of open spaces. Oddly, there's many dead ends in the maps, with no discernible secrets or pickups. There's occasional puzzles which are self-contained, all of them matching the correct code sequence. Compared to Half-Life, Sin, or even Quake 2, the level of interaction and map variety is anemic. You'll struggle to remember any section. Graphically, Requiem straddles that halfway house of 3D that was decent then and now very primitive. Basic untextured objects look so much worse than the crisper sprite work a few years prior. The art direction I think is solid. There's definitely a sense of atmosphere in the more fantastical areas. Their infrequency is a pity, as it gets pretty boring fighting through the same brown and grey rooms for 6 hours. There's no major glitches except a few disappearing enemies, clipping issues, and hit detection feeling a bit off. That part could be a skill issue actually. What really appealed to me and others to try at Requiem was the mix of gunplay and magical powers, and even now, that's an attractive proposal. For 99, it's a great concept, only comparable to Dark Forces 2. The small FPS arsenal starts with the pistol, a slow but accurate slug thrower. The shotgun deals decent damage with ample ammo. The machine gun is your workhorse, with an absurd rate of fire that'll stun and knock down enemies as fast as you can fire. It's a surprising standout. The explosive options include a grenade and rocket launcher, though splash damage good at clearing rooms. There's also the sniper rifle you'll rarely use due to the cramp enviros, and the special weapon is a railgun they'll give enemies in a single shot. It's boilerplate stuff. There's enough ammo that'll carry you through the game, and I would have liked a few more experimental options. However, there's a decent variety of enemies, from standard grunts, armored troopers, rocket-spewing mechs, and attack bots, and several demonic entities that gradually escalate the action. It seems that certain weapons like the shotgun and sniper rifle are better at penetrating armored targets, saving you from solely relying on the machine gun. The devs put a lot of effort into animating the enemies when hit, and it shows, from them keeling over to spinning around and limbs flying right off. It's got a real visceral campiness to it. There's a small debate over whether canned animations or ragdoll is better for combat gameplay. Requiem definitely supports the former camp well. Supplementing your guns are your angelic powers. These are split between offensive and more passive types, and are gradually unlocked over the course of the story. Initially, it's a chargeable Pentecost attack that can give enemies, and Holy Light, basically a flashlight. By the mid to late game, you'll have a host of powers to call upon, sharing a regenerative essence pool that'll almost supplant your firearms in their destructibility. These include enhanced speed and jumping, possession and resurrection, casting an earthquake, shooting brimstone, spawning a swarm of locusts, and slow motion, creating a primitive form of bullet time, and it's still nice. It's a wide pool of options that give enough spice to diversify the usual shooting. Unfortunately, the overarching problems with Requiem's gameplay emerge within the first couple hours. The pace of combat is quake fast. You move quickly and enemies hit hard. However, the engine Requiem is running on is deficient of the qualities of id Tech or Unreal. An alleged former developer at 3DO describes it as an in-house engine, and other announcements at the time of release have it offering greater fluidity and frame rate. Based on my time and what you've seen, it's very lacking. There's the obvious choppiness throughout, and you're locked into a clunky, cross-like movement pattern lacking momentum. It's best experienced whenever platforming. In addition, most enemies are hit scan and will shred you in the early game when you lack sufficient weapons, powers, or movement speed to counter them. You'll frequently drop dead from enemies firing across the map, and their placement behind doors and corners allows them to hit first. Although passive powers can be tied to the second mouse button for easy use, offensive ones are treated like other weapons you'll need to switch to. It's very cumbersome and unhelpful in a firefight to change between guns and powers. They should have tied them to individual hotkeys for instant use. Even then, many of these powers are more gimmicks than anything else, and often they're unlocked without any context or necessity in the current level. Turning enemies to salt looks cool, yet its wonky aiming and inadequacy against tougher opponents makes it wholly irrelevant. It's generally easier and faster to kill with guns than waiting for your slow firing powers to recharge. The late game features powers like Brimstone and Lightning that cuts through every enemy in 1 or 2 hits, negating the need of other powers or explosive weapons. It's just badly balanced. There's exactly 2 times where Malachi's powers are used for progressing the story. Maybe they had an idea for including RPG elements, who knows. The occasional boss fights could have been a reprieve utilizing all your powers in an interesting way. Even here though, only a couple attacks are effective. You're stuck in these tiny arenas where you attack, hide, recharge, and save scum to victory. You might feel knocking the difficulty down to easy would make Requiem a nice Motorfest power fantasy, except it reduces the enemy count, further barrening the maps. Malachi may start off weak, but he becomes absurdly overpowered after the halfway mark. The enemies don't necessarily become stronger, you just have far more hit points and essence to shrug off their barrage. Enough to actually skip them entirely. It's very disappointing, as I probably would have liked Requiem a lot more if I played it 15 years ago. The concept is fun enough to warrant someone else taking a shot at, which in a time of endless boomer shooter throwbacks would be welcomed. Looking slightly back and ahead of Requiem's release, there were plenty of better aged titles. Sin, AVP, Undying, Red Faction, Half-Life, Gunman Chronicles, Kingpin, and Redline. What Requiem really reminded me of was Shogo by Monolith, another conceptually awesome game that's very flawed for similar reasons. If you're still keen for it, it's readily available on Steam and GOG for a paltry price, and I suppose considering what's offered in the AAA space nowadays, it's actually not a bad idea to check out if you've played everything else.